Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Man Plus Machine, AI for Market Researchers. So in today's presentation, we will explore the role that artificial intelligence will play in helping organizations move from data to insights and ultimately to business intelligence. So my name is Ashley Wolf. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at FuelCycle, and I'm very excited to have all of you with us today. And like I mentioned before, we're very excited to be talking about this topic. You know, it's a hot topic right now that a lot of people are adding their commentary to, so we're hoping to add our own unique spin to it today. But before we start, I do have a few housekeeping items that I want to go over with you. So if you have any questions at any time throughout today's presentation, please feel free to submit them to either the question or chat box inside the GoToWebinar interface. And then I will catalog them throughout the presentation and come back to them during our Q&A session at the end. Also, I wanted to mention, if you haven't joined us before, we have a substantial catalog of case studies, white papers, webinars, and industry resources located at fuelcycle.com, which I encourage you to take a look at when you have time. And so today's webinar should take about 30 minutes, and then we will go into a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session like I mentioned. So with that, I would like to introduce our presenter, which is the wonderful Rick Kelly. So he is FuelCycle's in-house expert on insights and customer experience. And so if you're a regular for our webinars, he's one of our main hosts that we like to feature. He has spent most of his career in the market research industry, working closely with clients and operations teams to ensure clients' needs are met. Also, if anybody is on the line is going to the IIEX conference in June, Rick is actually going to be speaking on the GRIT panel there, and he will be providing commentary on this year's GRIT report, which will address hot button topics like the future of sampling, adoption of automation, and emerging methods. So thank you, Rick, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back on.
Yeah, as always, we enjoy it. So with that, I'm actually going to turn the presentation over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ashley. I very much appreciate it. And good morning and good afternoon to everybody attending the webinar today. We have a few dozen people in attendance today, which I think is a great responsibility for me to clearly communicate what we believe the role of artificial intelligence will be for market researchers in the coming years. So very much appreciated, and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. So this presentation is really given with the assumption that our audience members are extremely smart, extremely capable people, but that they have little exposure to the field of artificial intelligence. So I don't think we have anybody like this on the webinar today, but if you're in the computer science department at Stanford or MIT, I honestly suggest that you jump off the call now and go get a cup of coffee and save yourself an hour. So the scope of our conversation is not to provide a completely perfect forecast of what AI can and will do, but rather to lay out what our vision is and how we think the future of market research will look. To that end, I'm going to cover a few topics up on the screen here. We'll define artificial intelligence. We'll jump into how AI works and talk about some of the practical applications of AI and where it's being used in business, and talk about its role in the current and future state of market research and the impact on market researchers. So maybe I spent too much time in my life in academia, but actually, and maybe I'm accustomed to giving too long-winded answers to questions, as my 4-year-old may attest. But I think the context around AI is really important to understanding how AI is going to affect market research in general. So, and I hope that this coverage will be valuable for you, that it's not repetitive, and I'll be as succinct as I think is possible. And another thing to mention here is that the field of AI is a very broad field and covers a multitude of topics. So for one to say that you understand artificial intelligence entirely is probably about as absurd as saying that you understand physics entirely. Sure, it's possible and that you can learn many principles and you can even become a deep expert in a subfield, but I think it's better to take the approach of the late, great, Nobel Prize winning Richard Feynman and to say, I know enough to know that I am dumb. And that's not to say that you or I are dumb, but rather that we recognize that we have a lot of learning to do in this field. And I think that mindset opens us up for learning and evolving, especially in a dynamic field like artificial intelligence. As the title of our presentation indicates, which is it's man plus machine, not man versus machine, our view of the impact of AI on research is ultimately positive, although I think that we're going to go through a lot of change, and the next few years will be very, very dynamic, which is a euphemism for probably a little chaotic. At Fuel Cycle, we believe that AI will be the single most important development in market research since Daniel Starch and George Gallup began testing advertising effectiveness in the 1920s. I don't think that I'm saying anything unique or controversial by saying that the introduction of artificial intelligence to the business world will have as equal an impact as the Industrial Revolution on our society in the future. At Fuel Cycle, we have AI-driven components integrated into our online community platform today and are looking forward to continued integration and development of efforts. And again, we absolutely expect developments here to fundamentally change the market research industry within a short time frame if these changes aren't already taking place. So let's start with the question, what is artificial intelligence? And really there are two types of AI. One is artificial general intelligence, and the other is artificial narrow intelligence. So artificial general intelligence, or as it's often called, strong AI, is the AI of the movies. So it's a computer that's capable of doing absolutely anything a human can. This is the AI of Skynet and of HAL 9000. And artificial general intelligence is likely a far way off in the future. And this is probably the AI that most people think about when they think about AI. You know, artificial general intelligence, when or if it is developed, will have far-ranging, nearly unimaginable implications to the fabric of society and life as we know it today. A computer will be able to pretty much learn and do anything that a human can, if not more, because they're not subject to the constraints that we are. So artificial narrow intelligence, or weak AI, is really the current state of artificial intelligence today. It's a computer that is capable of performing cognitive functions within a confined set of applications. The narrow component is very, very important for us to recognize. This is intelligence that functions only in very well-defined environments where humans set the optimization criteria. And so we'll discuss current applications of narrow AI in a few minutes. But to kind of throw out a few examples here, you likely interact with narrow AI on a daily basis, even if you don't know it. So on your smartphone, Siri, Google Now, or Cortana are all examples of consumer-facing weak AI. And indeed, the algorithms that use autocorrect or attempt to predict which word you're going to write next while typing out a text message to a friend are actually powered by narrow artificial intelligence. So you can see that these are really constrained applications of artificial intelligence. Oftentimes, when, and as other commenters have pointed out, when a new skill is developed within artificial narrow intelligence, we no longer call it AI. Instead, we give it names like machine vision or optical character recognition. I'm not quite sure why that is. I assume that's because the marketing department got involved somewhere, and that's what's happened. So when we think about why the growth of interest in AI. So over the past few years, interest in AI has become increasingly more common and much more sought after. You're looking at a chart now that's provided by tech research firm CB Insights. This is showing the trend of the search term artificial intelligence from 2012 until now. And so every few years, some new technology comes into the mainstream, generates a lot of hype, and then falls to the wayside or goes out of mainstream. You think about things like Bitcoin or blockchain technologies a couple of years ago, it's all anybody could talk about. You had to have a blockchain strategy, and that's kind of rapidly faded from mainstream conversations. And AI itself has gone through several eras of hype, eras where researchers thought that they were on the verge of a new breakthrough. So in a broad sense, I think we can think of the start of AI and the future of computers as far back as the development of syllogistic logic, which Aristotle did in the 4th century BC. However, the concept of a truly sentient AI started in the 1930s. So we've been working on this problem for 80-something years, if I can do math correctly, as a market researcher. So that's a long time to be working on a problem, but it's a big problem, so it probably makes sense that it takes a while to work on. And as far back as the 1950s, researchers have been predicting the emergence of AI within a few short years. So people will say, it's just a few years away, or now it's just a few years away. And that's kind of happened every decade, pretty much cyclically for the past 50 years or so. By the way, as an aside, for the pessimists out there, there's a very well-written article just published in the Harvard Business Review arguing that the first wave of pure AI startups is bound to fail, which may be true, and I encourage you to take time out and to read a converse opinion as well. But I've also seen this current era that we're living called the Cambrian explosion of AI. And if you think back to college biology, the Cambrian explosion is the origin of biological life millions and millions of years ago. So some people smarter than smarter than me, think we're witnessing a Cambrian explosion of AI, which is pretty cool to think about, because even if the robots do end up getting us in the long run, it's a pretty cool thing to witness and a cool era to live in. So given that technology in general and AI specifically have gone through several periods of hype and then inevitable disappointment, why should we think that this era will be any different? So as I mentioned before, some AI efforts would doubtlessly fail, and they have failed in the past too. I think we truly believe that our current era is the beginning of a nearly unavoidable march toward increased applications of narrow artificial intelligence, or weak AI. And there's a couple reasons why this is the case. Number one, it's advancements in research, and number two is cloud computing. I'll talk about the advancements in research real quick here. So last year, in 2016, you may have seen a number of news stories covering the triumph of AlphaGo, a narrow application of artificial intelligence designed to play the Chinese game of Go over leading world champion professional Go players. So Go is a computationally difficult game played on a 19 by 19 grid, with players placing black and white stones at grid intersections in an attempt to capture other stones and take territory on the Go board. So that may not sound like it's computationally complex, but let me give you some context here. So the number of feasible arrangements of stones and permutations on the Go board is actually more than the atoms in the universe, which is an absolutely mind-boggling number to think about. So what that means is that human players tend to rely more on intuition and experience than they do on probability prediction. So prior to 2015, no computer program had been able to defeat an expert Go player. And AlphaGo, which was developed by Google's DeepMind, beat the most expert Go players in the world a successive 50 times in a row in online matches in 2016. And so the reason this is so impressive is, again, because of the computational requirements. There's too much, for even a computer to calculate the optimal playing strategy at every turn. The number of atoms in the universe is a little too complex to calculate, every time it's your turn to take a turn. So instead, a computer like AlphaGo has to play like a human, using intuition and experience rather than calculating precise probabilities at every turn. So AlphaGo was able to do exactly that. So in other words, narrow AI is capable of achieving human-like thinking and strategy. And AlphaGo isn't the only story of AI success. AI is capable of making human-like decisions in transportation and other industries as well. And the second reason I mentioned was cloud computing, right? So when we discuss the reasons that cloud computing will become an unstoppable force, it's impossible to do so without mentioning the explosion and availability of massive computing power through cloud computing. Cloud computing has increased the availability of high-powered supercomputers at relatively minuscule prices. So, for instance, if you were to log on to your browser today and you were to limit the volume of data that you use and the number of analyses you conduct, you'd likely be able to run a lot of artificial intelligence-based computations for free using available public clouds from Google, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, among others. So transitioning a little bit now and talking about the 5 primary camps from which AI originates. And these 5 come from Pedro Domingos at the University of Washington, who's a leading AI researcher. And again, I think that using, kind of explaining how AI works helps you to see how it's going to affect the market research industry. So, and many of these you see here, or at least a couple of them, use similar principles to those used by statisticians in the market research industry. Because after all, I think in some cases, some of AI is just automated statistics on steroids, right? So I'll briefly outline what these are. start off with a symbol list. So this is a process that starts with premises and conclusions and then works to fill in gaps. In other words, this is defining like an end outcome or end phenomena with what is known now, and then finding knowledge in between to make and replicate the connection between beginning and end. So the best way to explain this is really thinking about the scientific method. We have data, we have an outcome, and what we need to do is explain the connection between the data and that outcome. So a machine learning algorithm in this case can generate and refine multiple hypotheses on its own to explain outcomes until it gets it right and is able to replicate those going forward. Second is the connectionist. This is probably the most common one that people hear about today. This is really creating artificial neural structures and connecting them in a neural network. So the attempt here is to replicate the behavior of biological neural networks, meaning how our brain works, to learn and progress over time, right? So this is really important to point out that this model is a model that tech giants like Facebook, Google, and Microsoft are most invested in learning because it provides an expansive pathway to continue teaching an algorithm over time. Evolutionaries. This is the application of evolutionary principles to algorithms, meaning that what we have is algorithms that are randomly generated and evolve through sequential cycles toward optimization. This is sometimes called like stochastic optimization because what you really do is you're generating a random set of algorithms and then kind of seeing which one works, and in each round, each successive round, they combine, they match up, they mutate until you try and find like an optimal algorithm. What we're really trying to do is to mimic evolutionary principles with in a computer, and this one is probably like the least favorable or least has the dimmest prospects for the future, although it is useful in some narrow cases. And then we come to the Bayesians, right? So many people on the call today are probably familiar with Bayesian inference, and Bayesian networks apply the same principles as Bayesian statistics. And just for context, for those not familiar, a popular example of a Bayesian is Nate Silver, 538, which is essentially what it means is that you're modeling like the quantitative strength between two variables and allow your probabilistic beliefs or what's called your priors to be updated as more data or more information becomes available. So this allows an algorithm to be consistently updated as more data and more information is introduced into the system. And then finally, the analogizers. So this is hopefully relatively straightforward to explain. The algorithm here is really like using like a nearest neighbor principle, which means that like follows like. And commercial examples of this really include like product recommendations on e-commerce sites. So for instance, when I purchase a book and load on Amazon and load it into my Kindle, Amazon recommends another book to me based on my book library, and the book library is people similar to me. So when you see people who purchased X also purchased Y, that's really using an analogy. So I cover these points to point out that there are several different approaches to artificial intelligence, and they're going to dictate some of the outcomes in the long run. But there's one consistent principle across all of them. For one, because they are for now narrow AI applications, they really are just recursive or self-learning algorithms designed to optimize for certain criteria within a set of constraints. And we'll come back to what that means in a little bit here too. So we're going to switch gears a little now and hopefully get out of the weeds of what artificial intelligence is and isn't, and switch to a discussion of the commercial applications of AI. So advancements in AI mean that investments in AI startups have continued to grow. And again, going back to the research done by CB Insights, in 2016, globally, 658 AI startups received a little over $5 billion in venture capital, up from $3.1 billion in 2015 and just $589 million just 5 years ago in 2012. So clearly there's a growing interest in projections around the commercial viability of artificial intelligence. And generally, I wouldn't recommend using social proof as evidence for predicting what you think the future will be. But in this case, I think it's safe to say that the impact of this amount of funding will be felt in the AI space and in industry for a long time. So really, it feels like we expect AI to be like the internet. Every industry will come to use and depend on AI It's just a matter of when and how the application will happen. So kind of like how you have this evolution where every company is now a tech company, whether you're in retail, CPG, financial services. Someday every company is going to be an AI company because it's just going to be a part of your strategy and a channel that you use. And so one of the projections here from Gartner is that 85% of customer interactions will be managed without a human by 2020. Instead, depending on weak AI applications to lower costs and improve efficiency of customer interactions. And funnily enough, your boss also believes that AI is going to help. So according to research done by Narrative Science, 80% of executives believe that AI will help make workers better performers too. So whether you like it or not, the introduction of AI across all business functions is going to come very soon. And there are plenty of commercial examples today, which I'll go ahead and march through quickly. Example of segmentation. So here's a product by Adobe called Segment IQ. I'm not trying to call it any particular product, just say, hey, here's an example of what can happen. And Segment IQ purports to allow marketers to identify and segment audiences automatically based on behavioral differences. And by the way, the ability to automatically segment based on behavior is clearly starting to encroach on the field of market research, right? And something you're all likely familiar with is Google Translate, which is actually a really interesting application of a neural network. Researchers at Google designed an algorithm to translate one language to another, which the algorithm actually does by first translating the origin language, the input language, into a language created using AI, created by the neural network itself, and then translating it to the output language. So it goes input language to the language that Google's neural net defined, and then outputs it to the output language. And so this apparently allows the language to be more accurately translated than straight input to output language translations. And it also allows the neural network to translate into languages it hasn't seen before through pattern recognition, which I think is pretty cool too. Chatbots are another communication medium in vogue. Chatbots allow people to interact with a bot that can branch or alter logic based on user input, such as the sentiment or language used inside a message to a bot. So bots are available on many messaging platforms like Facebook's Messenger and the messaging app Kik. At Fuel Cycle, we actually are really interested in chatbots. We believe chatbots could be the kind of power the next wave of respondent interaction and customer experience, and have chatbots in testing stages now. And by the way, as an aside, again using social proof, but Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, also believes that the chatbot ecosystem is kind of the next app ecosystem. And most of these are going to be driven by some level of artificial intelligence. Sorry, just getting a drink here. So, needless to say, the commercial applications of AI are endless and just getting started. In all likelihood, as you mentioned before, AI is going to be a horizontal event, meaning that it affects all industries in a relatively short period of time, but there are obviously industries that are going to be affected sooner than later. So a couple of years ago, Deloitte published a report on the potential applications of AI and developed a useful framework to identify where AI is going to have a significant impact soon. So they call it the 3V framework. It has to be viable, meaning it has to have a large amount of data to ingest. It has to be valuable, so it's either going to improve sales or save on costs, and it has to be vital, so it's something that's kind of mission critical. So the first industries to be affected by AI will be areas where we expect AI to be viable, valuable, and vital. And so many of the AI startups receiving funding today are really in healthcare, financial services, and transportation. So if you think about this, neural networks can already do much of the work that radiologists do, identify cancer cells or fractures or whatever it might be at a scale that's unprecedented. Learning algorithms do a significant portion of the stock trading done on financial exchanges today. Already, a self-driving tractor trailer has driven across Europe, right? There was one that drove across Colorado too, delivering I think it was Coors Light from one location to another. And then think about this too. And if you were scared of robots or AI in the past, every time you get on a plane, on a commercial jet, it's pretty much flown by an algorithm, with the exception of takeoff and landing. Although I imagine that will change sometime soon too. So there's some commonalities across all these industries. When you think about healthcare, financial services, transportation, they produce massive amounts of data and are looking to make smarter, faster, and safer decisions than humans can reliably do. So if we think about industries where leaders would like to make smarter, faster, and safer decisions, I think it's pretty plain to say that insights or market research is a prime candidate for the introduction of AI. So let's go ahead and transition a little bit here. And we're going to start by focusing on the state of market research today. So without being too simplistic, I'd like us to think about what role market researchers play inside an organization today. Number one, it's for discovery. So identifying new markets, understand what consumers or customers are willing to pay, at what price. This is concept tests, diaries, everything fits into this category of really just discovering and understanding customer preferences. For risk mitigation, so that's preventing catastrophes by validating decisions with data, right? And then 3, for performance. So it's identifying opportunities for improving and sustaining innovation and incrementally updating products or services. So things like brand health tracking or path to purchase studies are good examples of this, where you're trying to optimize something or improve it incrementally. So the reason I think it's so important to consider what market research does as a function is to identify areas where computers may be better at our jobs than we are. Are there better tools or techniques available that an AI can take and run on its own without our input? And I think that's likely the case. And there are some jobs that we do that can and will be done as a result of by AI. So personally, whenever I think about the role that artificial intelligence is going to play on an industry, I like to think about the constraints a job function or industry is under. I think constraints are very, very important. So constraints are limitations that we have, and in our case, many of these constraints apply to humans, whereas artificial intelligence tends to remove constraints or tends to be less constrained than humans are, right? So with the advent of computers that can run all day and all night and make decisions without us, I think it's safe to say that many of the constraints on market researchers will slowly slip away. So where we're bound by capacity or by capabilities, we will no longer be bound. And so here's some quick examples here of constraints that we have. So we're limited in our ability to process individually massive amounts of data, right? We're limited in our ability to connect disparate data sets across, to gather richer insights. Sometimes we're constrained by choosing the right methodologies or the right technical solution, and we're often constrained by costs. We can't constantly be doing research because there's some level of variable labor that goes into it that tends to be more expensive. So artificial intelligence can and will wipe away all of these constraints. So methodological recommendations can and probably should be made based on the desired output. So I'd like to know X, here's the recommendation for your methodology. Knowledge is going to be decoupled from people and placed in machines. So computers don't need food, water, or beauty sleep, meaning that algorithms don't mind looking across multiple massive data sets for connections between data. In addition, the marginal cost of conducting research should decline as we place specialized knowledge into machines and then spread that knowledge broadly. Okay, so when I think about the future of market research, I'm really thinking about a future without constraints, or at the very least with fewer constraints than we have today. And I encourage each of you to consider the constraints that you and your team have today. Is it budget? Is it cognitive capacity? What is it? And what could you do if the constraints were lifted? And how will things change? For instance, one of the things I keep coming back to is the cognitive capacity of researchers. So no matter how talented you are, how smart you are, your cognitive capacity is finite in some way, shape, or form, right? And there are probably connections between data sets that you and I wouldn't think to investigate because of our limited ability to process or even hypothesize about every data set that we own as a business. For instance, perhaps somebody's propensity to recommend a product is connected or deeply connected to their willingness to pay for a different product. And we wouldn't necessarily think about the the connections between those, but an AI can, right? And we should also think about the connection between artificial intelligence and automation. So I don't want to conflate the two here, because automation and artificial intelligence are not the same thing, and not everything that is automated requires AI, but automation is going to become increasingly more commonplace, and automation is often a result of the introduction of AI. So a computer will be able to understand and process data for you, and then at the very least, write a summary of the research that you've done for you. So you think about this here, is that AI bots already write summaries of professional baseball games. And so there's no reason to imagine that they won't be summarizing interesting data points for you and creating charts in the near future. So one of the things that's interesting is that our marketing team is currently running an interesting industry study on how market researchers spend their time in the workplace. We're still in fielding here, but one of the questions we ask is about the various tasks that corporate researchers engage in. So far, respondents from end clients report that an average of 40% of their time is spent analyzing data and writing reports. So that time may all be available to you now if an AI is analyzing, summarizing data, and making inference for you. Another example where constraints are removed is analyzing unstructured data in the form of photos, videos, and text to understand emotion. So right now, if we wanted to classify 1,000 photos for the emotion in people's faces, you and I would probably have to sit down around a conference table. We would carefully deliberate and decide on the criteria for analyzing emotion, and then probably have a team or a panel of people go through all 1,000 photos and try and classify them ourselves. So that's obviously very laborious. It's a very painful process, and as a result, very expensive too. However, it turns out that there are patterns to people's faces when they're sad, happy, angry, confused, across different cultures and everything too. And so machine vision, a form of artificial intelligence, can analyze the structure of people's faces in photos and instantly classify what the emotion is. And so when I say instantly, I mean pretty much instantly for all 1,000 photos. So AI removes the constraints on time that we have for our current research efforts, but it is also expansionary, meaning that we are now able to collect and analyze more types of data in the future. And so again, just these are two examples. Is really the implication for market research is that many of the constraints we experience today will be completely eliminated. So the question is how do we prepare for it? It sounds really ominous, but how do we prepare for the introduction of artificial intelligence into market research? And so I'm gonna tell a story here. I wasn't very good at chess as a little kid, but my best friend in the 5th grade loved chess, and that meant I loved chess too, right? And so I always thought chess was a really great, fun, and complex game and a fun pursuit. And then last year I learned that Go is actually trillions of times more complex than chess, and I was disappointed in my 5th grade self. But so anyways, I'm going to tell a chess story that I think is a good analogy for what the future of market research looks like. So in May 1997, and you may or may not remember this, I certainly do, the world, maybe not the entire world, but many people watched with rapt attention as Garry Kasparov, the world's chess champion at the time, played IBM's Deep Blue computer in a 6-game epic chess tournament. And so prior to this, never before had a computer beaten a world chess champion under tournament conditions. In fact, Kasparov had beaten Deep Blue a year before in a similar tournament, and the 1997 match was a rematch. So IBM had trained Deep Blue with months of simulated and real chess matches and taught Deep Blue to compute the probable outcomes of next moves. So what that means is that Deep Blue wasn't necessarily AI, for an example of the speed and computational power behind computers. So in May 1997, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Deep Blue ended up beating Kasparov, and over the course of 6 games. And the final match resulted in Deep Blue beating him in just 20 moves, which is relatively fast and unprecedented at this level of play. So the Kasparov defeat marked a change in the way that computers were regarded. Computers are now very, very capable of defeating professional chess players, world champions included. So, however, today, the most powerful chess players are neither man nor computer. The most successful chess players today are what we call centaur chess teams. So it's a hybrid of human players and computers. And they play in like kind of a freestyle chess where they blend human intuition and computers' computation power, and this has led to formidable chess pairing. And all the best chess players, if you want to optimize for the absolute best chess playing, you're going to have a blend of human and computer together. And I think that's really where we're going to end up with market research. I think I see a future where business experts, the equivalent of professional chess players, coupled with highly efficient, narrow artificial intelligence applications, and work symbiotically to produce better outcomes than one could do alone. Potential of what this looks like is for research to provide like optimization constraints for an algorithm to make decisions, and then ensuring the algorithm produces the result. Or where an AI application dismisses an anomaly in a data set, the researcher can use their intuition and broad knowledge to flag the anomaly for further review. So the advent of artificial intelligence and unlimited computing power is going to change our industry forever. And I think there's going to be real challenges for research vendors and corporate buyers alike as we move through the adoption curve together. But I do think that there are a few things that we can do as individuals and as organizations to prepare for a future with fewer constraints and massively more data. So the key is that researchers need to do things that computers cannot do. Any routine set of decision-making can and will be automated. So if you're an analyst, really we suggest bringing your human strengths to the table and being more connected to big picture thinking and to business strategy overall. After all, you're going to be guiding an artificial intelligence application rather than being subject to it. If you're a data scientist, well, you're probably well on your way to understanding how AI works, but use routine decisions and start to improve algorithms and help optimize the algorithms over time. And then for people who tend to be more qual-oriented, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that for AI to be successful requires a large amount of data, right? And sometimes qualitative work by its nature doesn't have a lot of data to run with. And so it's important for people who work in qual fields to be storytellers and be able to highlight narrow changes with smaller data sets. And of course, I encourage everyone to be specialists, right? It's specialize in something that a computer can't do or hasn't done or can't be routinely automated today. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up the conversation and move to questions if we have any.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. That was so informative. Since I worked in marketing, I don't really get to learn a lot about artificial intelligence and how we use it in market research and the future applications. And so this was really helpful for me, and I'm hoping we'll have, it was helpful for our audience, and maybe there will be lots of questions that come in. But I do want to make sure and reiterate that we are opening up for questions. So if anybody has any, please enter them into the question or chat box in the GoToWebinar interface, and we'll make sure that we answer them today. So the first one that we have actually came in from Thomas. He asked, from a particular perspective, what advice would you give, a practical perspective, what advice would you give a market researcher who knows very little about AI?
That's a good question, Thomas. So what I would suggest is, I think you're going to want to learn about artificial intelligence. And the best way you can do that is start using it and understand like the constraints and possibilities for narrow applications of AI today. So use digital assistants, explore, play. If you're on Facebook, use Facebook's like Messenger, the bots on Messenger, to understand how they're interacting with people and the potential today. I also encourage people to build on their own. You can find services that allow you to play with AI frameworks without being an AI expert yourself. And so I'd be very curious, read a lot, and try and make application of the knowledge that you're gathering.
No, that's great. And I mean, I just wanted to throw this out there for the audience because, I mean, we were just on the phone with a Forrester analyst talking about how, like, a huge gap in the industry is, how do you take insights to actions across the organization, and how do you think AI is going to help market researchers really disseminate insights across the organization and make them applicable to the business applications?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the storytelling aspect that we were just talking about a moment ago, right? So when researchers are freed up from the constraints of managing Excel tables or putting something together in SPSS, that frees them up to be more consultative to other business leaders, and I think that's imperative for them to do that to be successful.
Well, just waiting. It seems to be a rather shy audience today on the webinar. So just want to remind people we do have a few more minutes for the Q&A. But just for now, I'm actually going to move forward to Rick's contact information. So feel free, if you do have any questions and maybe just are on the fence, if you want to ask them in a more public webinar forum, please feel free to reach out directly to Rick Kelly. He is happy to answer any questions that you might have. But it doesn't appear that there's any more follow-up questions at this time. So again, Rick, I really want to thank you for being here today. This was absolutely informative, and it's always good information. So till next time, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe I'll set up a bot to respond to my emails for me.
I love it. Well, thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you.